Welcome everyone to the April Consulting webinar from CDI. My name is Michael Mathis. I am the Client Services Director here at CDI, and I will be your host for today's webinar, where we will be mastering folder structure basics, the ultimate guide to folder best practices. During the webinar today, if you do have any questions, please post them in the questions box. I will take time at the end of the webinar to go through questions, and I will also be keeping an eye on them through the webinar if there is something that comes up specific to what we are talking about. If anything does come up, you have an urgent question, my audio cuts out, something catastrophic happens, please raise your hand and we will be able to address it during the webinar. And some tips for success during today's webinar. Take good notes and screenshots to help you remember important and key topics after the webinar. Don't be afraid to ask questions during the webinar. Like I mentioned on our past couple of slides, you can ask questions in the question box or raise your hand. Please complete our survey after the webinar. We always are looking forward to feedback and recommendations for new topics and how we can help our attendees get the most from the experience. Lastly, please remember this webinar will be recorded and available on the CDI YouTube channel within a day or two of the webinar being completed. All right, today's topic is going to be folder structure best practices, and our webinar is primarily focused on Laserfiche administrators. If you are not a Laserfiche administrator, please stay in our webinar as there will be information that is valuable to you as well. During our webinar today, we're going to be covering best practices for folder structures, searching within folders and folder searches, security regarding folders and how security comes into play within your folder structure decisions, and utilizing workflows to create folder structures. Folder structure design is really more of an art than a science. There's many ways of organizing a repository, all of which are equally valid. It's really going to kind of depend on a couple key points. How are your users going to be accessing the repository? Are they going to be searching, browsing, accessing documents through integrations? How is new content being added into the repository, whether it's scanning or direct import into folders, autofile workflows, quick fields, or other integrations? At the root of the repository, there's going to be kind of all of your top level folders. These are going to be based on departments such as human resources, operations, client files, property files, or based on functional purposes such as incoming scans or auto-filing. Underneath of your main folder structures, you are going to have subfolders and sub-subfolders. Typically, as a best practice, subfolders should be limited to 3 to 4 levels in depth if possible, and they should be limited in the number of subfolders within a folder structure as well. Decision paralysis can really come into play when users are trying to file a document or look for a document, especially if you have two folders that are very close in name. So for example, if we had correspondence and notes split out into two separate folders, it would be more difficult for the user to decide if it's correspondence or if it's a note, and therefore more difficult to use your folder structure. If you have a large number of folders contained within a parent folder, say we're reaching thousands, tens of thousands, it would be a good idea to start breaking those folders up to make the repository more performant, as well as to make things easier to find. So for example, in folder structure 2, all of our client folders are going to be contained just within a client folder parent folder. If we start getting into a large folder structure, it would be a good idea to break that client folder structure up into separate folders based on, say, advisors or branch or location, kind of whatever would make the most sense for your business use. The next thing to keep in mind is going to be how index fields and other filing workflows will come into play, including workflows, quick field sessions, and integrations. Applying index fields to folders is going to greatly help with searchability of the repository, as well as being able to integrate more easily with your repository. For example, if your workflow is looking for a folder based on the path and the client folder name may change, you could apply a client ID field to your folder, and your auto-filing workflow could look for that folder based off of the ID rather than the path. The same would go with quick field sessions, where the more structured your folder structure is, the more easily it's going to be able to configure your quick field sessions to release documents by path, rather than having to run searches as well as possibly workflows to get everything to file. Some tips and tricks for folders. We do have the ability to copy and paste folders only. If you have a folder structure that you really like and want to reuse it, but there are documents in that folder, we can copy the folder structure only. Folders can also be marked with a star as a bookmark, just like documents can, and they will show up in the starred entries display. Shortcuts to entries are helpful to allow users to navigate to documents or folders more quickly. For example, if we had a folder structure for employee working folders, within there we could have a folder for that employee's active projects, which would contain shortcuts to the project folder that would be throughout your different client folders, for example. Assigning templates and fields to your client folders will help with searchability. This is not limited to just client folders, but in our sample here, we have a client folders template to allow searching for that folder by the client name and or the account number. This could also be useful for, say, property files, where we could search by the property address, the subdivision, or any other information pertaining to that property. Naming of folders is also going to come into play with the usability of your repository. Naming folders with a number or a prefixed alpha character or non-alpha character will help for either prioritizing folders to the top of the list or by ordering the folders more logically during or in your folder structure. All right, at this point, we will jump over to the Laserfiche repository. And I have a folder structure here set up. So we have our top level folder, and currently this top level folder is displaying at the bottom. We could rename this folder with a number, or I've seen exclamation marks, to bring this folder up to the very top of your folder structure. So for example, one incoming scans is named with the 1 to bring that up towards the top of the folder structure where we're more likely to be looking for that folder. We're using that folder more often. Under the accounts payable folder structure, I have a couple samples here. We have monthly invoices, structure A, where the folder is named with the month. Here, when we sort by name, it doesn't help us to easily find the folder we're looking for. If we were to prefix with the numeric form of the month, sorting by name allows us to quickly see 10 October, where we're expecting to see, well, let's go 12 December. We're expecting to see December at the bottom because it's the last month, rather than towards the top. If we go back to our tip of copying only a folder structure in our folder to copy, let's look under our new hire files. We have a few files in here. There's nothing under pre-hire forms, but I want to copy this to reuse the folder structure. If we right click and select move or copy, that's going to bring up our move or copy dialog, where we then can choose to copy folders only. And we are going to copy this into our top level folder structure and paste that here. And we'll select OK to confirm our copy. Now if we look under top level folder, inside of folder to copy, new hire files, we only have our folder structure. In this sample, we only had 2 subfolders, but this comes in to be very useful if you have a large number of folders or a nested folder structure that you would like to quickly copy and paste. We can also star folders using the star icon, and those will then show up under your starred entries, allowing for quick and easy access to that folder. All right, next in our agenda, we will move on to folder searches. There are, depending on if you're using the cloud or web client versus the Windows client, searching is going to be accessed a little bit differently. In the Windows client, you can press the F3 key on your keyboard or select the search icon in the toolbar. Within the Laserfiche web client, we have the search bar at the top of the page, and we can access additional search options through these search filters. There are 3 types of folder searches available. We can search within the entire repository, within the current folder, or within the folder that we specify. If we are looking within the current folder, we can optionally include subfolders or exclude subfolders. If we exclude subfolders, we are going to be searching only the documents and folders directly contained within the folder and not looking anywhere else within the folder tree. It's not going to find documents in any subfolders, only that current folder. If we choose search within the selected folder, we do have a few additional options there. We can search either within the folder or not within the folder. and a combination of any of the above by using the add link to add additional items. Again, we have the include subfolders, and that works the same way as we had discussed in the current folder option. All right, so next we will jump into a quick demo of searching in the web client. So here we can select our search filters option to search within a folder. So we can choose within the entire repository, within our current folder, which in this case is our folder to copy, or within the selected folder. So we want to search within there it comes. So we're going to search in repository 1 in our April webinar folder. And let's search within the top level folder. We will include subfolders, so it's going to search everything within the top level folder. And we will remove our other search options here and run our search. So here we found quite a few items. So let's exclude the folder for folder to copy. Wait, we're looking only within top level folder. I lost track of my search. Let's change our search here. We're going to search within our April webinar folder first. Run our search. Here we go. Here we have a large number of results just within that folder. So we can then exclude, so not in, so we are going to exclude our folder, we'll exclude accounts payable. That'll be a good exclusion. If we run our search again, here we have far fewer results without the search results from the accounts payable folder. Next up, we are going to look into some folder security options. We won't be exploring all of the features of folder security and access rights. Access rights within the repository really could be its own webinar entirely. What we are going to be looking at today is going to be the inheritance of security on folders and using the folder structure to logically separate documents for applying security. When we are planning security of the system and the folder structure, one of the main items to take into consideration is how are users going to be finding their documents? Are they going to be searching for them, or are they going to be browsing? And limiting who can create new folders. If we allow our users to create folders wherever they would like, our repository will quickly get out of control. So the first thing to keep in mind is going to be inheritance of permissions. So when we apply permissions to a folder, we can choose many inheritance options. Different options are, or explanations for the different options are available in the Laserfiche help documentation. And typically, the permission set we see applied most often is this folder, subfolder, and documents. Next up is going to be our folder rights, which is going to allow or deny what users can do within that folder. Typically, the view option is checked if you're going to allow your users to browse through the folder structure. Otherwise, there are further options underneath the view where we can choose whether users can browse or only read the entries. All right, so if we go into our folder structure again, we'll go back to our folders. And let's select our top level folder. To view the access rights on the entries, we will go to Details, Show Advanced, and we can see our rights here. If we expand View, we can see there is Browse, Read, and see annotations, and the same is true for the other categories below. So if we were going to restrict our top level folder to disallow users from being able to browse, but we still want them to see documents, we can go to our folder and show security. And here we will add our accounting users or our accounting group. Here we're going to select this folder and subfolders. We will clear all of our options. This way, all of the security is going to inherit based on the default inheritance. And we are only going to modify this so that users are not able to browse this folder and subfolders. So users cannot browse through the top level folder to see documents in there, but they will still be able to search for those documents and see the documents through search results. It's a good idea at the top level of your folder structure to organize them by department or by functional role. That way, it's easier to restrict security or grant security to certain groups for that entire folder structure. You can get very granular with security and apply security to individual subfolders. However, the more granular you get with your security, the more difficult it's going to become to manage. That's why it's a good idea to use shortcuts and to deny the browse right for certain folders to restrict browsing through the folder structure to those folders. As long as the read permission is still granted on documents, the users will be able to search for those documents within the folder structure. We have a question on, do you have to be an admin in order to apply permissions and rights? You do not need to have, I take that back. In the administration side, there is a permission for manage entry security, and that will be needed to manage security within the repository. There's also a permission or an access right on entries to allow managing security. So if we have a department manager for Department A and a department manager for Department B, Both managers could have the manage security permission in the administration console, and we could then grant manager A the manage entry security permission on subfolder A, manager B the same permission on subfolder B, and that manager would then be able to grant or deny permissions on those folders for all users. Right. Next, we are going to look into generating reports. As I had mentioned, security can get very complicated and managing access rights can become quite difficult. So Laserfiche has a couple of reports available for managing entry access rights. The two reports in particular are going to be the effective access rights report, or the entry effective access rights report, and the user effective access rights report. These are available both in the web client, as we see in the screenshot here, as well as in the desktop client under the tasks menu. The entry effective access rights report will allow you to view the effective rights for the currently selected entry, either for all users or for selected members of a group or selected groups. You can specify exactly which rights to report on or add all rights for a comprehensive report. The user report is fairly similar, although it'll allow you to run the report for a specific user or users and all of the child entries and child folders and documents. So we'll go back to our demo and take a look at a couple of these reports here. So if we select our April webinar folder, under our More Actions menu, we can generate a report. We're going to generate our entry effective access rights report. So here we're going to generate our report in an Excel format. We do have other formats available. We'll report on all users. And I just want to report on who can view these entries. I'll click my OK button. My report is going to generate and get blocked by the pop-up blocker. If your report does get blocked, select the Always Allow Pop-ups from app.laserfiche.com, or if you are self-hosted, it will be your self-hosted Laserfiche URL. We'll select Done, and let's regenerate our report. And our file downloaded, so let's open that. Here is the effective rights for the folder we had selected. So everyone is able to see all of these entries. But we had changed our security on the accounts payable folder for the accounting user. So let's generate a report for the user effective access rights for accounting. We'll pull over all of our view options and select OK. Our report generates. And here we have the effective access rights for the accounting user. And this goes through each entry underneath of the entry we had selected to show where they have access. And finally today, we are going to be looking at workflows using folders. Workflows will be used for typically document auto-filing, which can also dynamically create the folder structure. Or we can have workflows just to create the standardized set of subfolders when a new folder is created. The activities most frequently used are going to be the move entry activity, the create entry activity to create a new folder, the assign rights activity to assign entry access rights to the folders, and the replicate entry activities if you are using a self-hosted environment. And now let's take a look at our workflow from the prior month's webinar, Always Be Auto-Filing. And we are going to modify this workflow to create our client folder and client folder structure if it does not yet exist. So first, we are going to use the find entries activity to determine whether or not our entry exists. We are going to find the entry at client files and the retrieve field value client name template field. We will add in a conditional decision. Let's do a conditional sequence since there's only one branch. Our condition is going to be if our token find entry was found is false, we are then going to create our entry for the client folder. We'll rename this activity, and our entry name is going to be our client name from our field value. We're going to create a folder, and this is going to be in the client files folder. Next, we will add in a create entry activity for each subfolder that we want to create. So here, our entry name is going to be compliance. It's going to be a folder, and we are going to create this in the output entry full path of the client folder that we created. And let's rename this to create compliance. And I am going to copy this activity and paste it for the other 5 entries that we will be creating. And I will update these activity names and the entry name for the contracts folder, the correspondence folder, oops, that was not the correct folder. So we have correspondence, we have financial planning. And we have our miscellaneous folder. If this were a folder that required special access rights, let's say it's a sensitive account and only certain users are able to access the folder, we can use the assign rights activity to assign those rights to our created client folder. So under assign rights to, we'll select our output entry for the client folder, and we can configure our rights. So here we can select support, and they are not going to be allowed to view anything. So we will deny all permissions to support and select OK. If we save our workflow and publish this, we can now go to our repository and we will go into our incoming scans folder. And we will pull in a sample document. On our document, we will assign the documents template to use our Always Be Auto-Filing workflow to auto-file the document. And let's populate our template information. So this is going to be correspondence, today's date, and our client name is Tanner, Peggy, and we will import our file. So there we have our document. We will wait a moment or two for the workflow to kick off. All right, now that workflow processed it, we see our green dot above refresh, so we can refresh and see our document is no longer in our incoming scans folder. If we look under client files, we can now see that Peggy Tanner has her folder created. And if we go to, we have all of our subfolders created and our document auto-filed into our correspondence folder. If we look at Peggy's folder under details and show advanced, we can see that our current user has full rights to this folder. If we right-click on our folder and show security to view all of the details, we can now see that our support user has no access to any of the entries within this folder, nor to this folder itself. Oops, I'm going to cancel. I think I just deleted that accidentally. Let's go back to show security. We can also see here that this security or this access control entry is not inherited from anywhere else in the repository. Whereas there is entry or access rights set on the repository 1, so our root folder, as well as the client files folder. And all of this access is going to compute down into the effective rights. So here we can remove our current connection and look for support. And we can see everything is denied other than manage security. And that's going to conclude the workflow demo. as well as our webinar for today. If you do have questions, there are resources available, both from Laserfiche as well as from CDI. And you can always contact us at consulting@citiesdigital.com, sales@citiesdigital.com, or support@citiesdigital.com if you do have further questions. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. My name is Michael Mathis, the Client Services Director at CDI. And at this point, please stay on the webinar to answer any questions. I do see we have a question for when saving to the repository from forms. Would you be able to use the forms process for filing or feed it over to workflow, or a combination depending on complexity? That is an excellent question, and I would say that would depend upon the complexity of the filing. Laserfiche Forms does have the Save to Repository task, which does have a lot of functionality built in. And there are going to be instances where you may need additional data from a database lookup or somewhere else. Typically, my choice here is going to depend upon, is everything I need available from the form submission, or am I going to need to do a search in the repository or look up additional data to find the final destination folder? Do we have any other questions today? You can either raise your hand or type your question into the questions box. All right, I don't see any additional questions coming in. If you do have any additional questions, definitely do not hesitate to reach out and ask. We love hearing questions. And again, please fill out the survey after the webinar. Thank you everyone for attending, and have a wonderful weekend.